welcome to my channel. My name is Sasa, and today in this sewing tutorial, I'll be showing how I made an animal hat. I modified the pattern Simplicity 2853 style D. I used the pieces 11 and 12. I extended the length of the hood side because I wanted to sit bunched up on my neck. For the hood center, I made a slit, so it's going to be sewn like a dart for the center back fin. For the side fins, with the right sides together, I sew all the way around with the 1 centimeter seam allowance. And I make 2 of these. This gray fabric is 100% polyester. There's a lot of different kind of fabrics that you can use. This one was just convenient for me at home. And the same thing for the back fin. I sew with the right sides together all the way around. Go slowly on the curves to try and get it as smooth as possible. Before I start sewing the final pieces, I normally do some tests on some scrap. So I decided to use fleece for the tummy or the inside of the fins to give it a bit more body. The fleece or padding or batting inside of the main fabric makes it give it a more puffy look. I cut the fleece using the same patterns for the fins, and then I cut off the seam allowance. On the main fabric, I clip the curves and I trim off any excess. This helps to remove any bulk or excess around the seams. Next, with the help of a chopstick, I flip them right side out and I press gently with the chopstick. Then I iron the fin pieces. I place the fleece inside of the fins, and using pins, I mark down where I want the lines to be. You could also mark the lines with a pencil or other kind of marking instrument. So with black thread, I go back and forth over the same spot 4 times. My main outer fabric is this soft plush fabric. It's not really fleece, it's not fake fur either, but it's very nice. When working with fabrics that are fur-like or velvet, normally the way you brush your hand, it's smooth one way and it's kind of rough the other way. So you want to make sure that you cut all your pieces in the same direction. The blue and yellow fabric are the same type of fabric. To find the center point, you fold the fabric in half and you mark that with a pin. And then you take those 2 pieces and you pin from the center and you pin outwards. This will help it be more even. As you sew around, adjust the yellow fabric so that you don't have any folds. The design has white polka dot spots, so I did a test with some paint. However, I don't like the final finish, so I decided to go with fabric instead. So I got some cups to measure perfect circles, and remember for the seam allowance. This white fabric is a thick polyester. It's the same kind of fabric as the gray fabric. So I folded the fabric with right sides together, and then I marked them out and I cut them all out. Since the circle is so small, to get it perfectly round is rather difficult. It could be better achieved if you did hand stitching instead, but that's too slow for me, and I'm pretty happy with this result, so it's good enough for me. Clip the curves before turning the circles right side out. I use a chopstick to gently push the edges. Be careful not to push too hard because it's really easy to make a hole. With the help of tweezers, I push the raw edges inside and then I iron them flat. When placing the spots, I don't want any of them in the cracks or get stuck in the seam, so make sure you check the seam allowances before pinning them down. I place the back fin lower than where the slit ends. This gives you space for sewing. I baste this to the center back. Fold over with the right sides together, pin it, and you're ready to sew the back seam. When you get to the end, you want to slowly taper off to the end and then sew all the way off without backstitching. So what tapering means is that as you get closer to the point, the seam allowance gets smaller and smaller until the needle is off the fabric. I tie knots to the thread by hand. So next we line up the hood sides, we pin them, and we get ready for sewing. I experimented on a few scrap fabrics until I found out this method to attach the fins. So first I basted very closely to the edge of the fin to the main fabric. I tried on the hat first and decided where I wanted the fins with pins. So you fold over with the right sides together and you want to sandwich the fin inside the main fabric. So you're making like a small little dart. So you want to sew in a curved line where you start at the edge of the fabric, catching the fin and then sewing off again. I like this method because there's no hand sewing involved. It's pretty fast, and when you wear it, the fin sticks out to the side without flopping over. The white part of the eyes is made the same way as the spots on the back. I use buttons for the center eye as well as for the nose. I use a pin to help mark the position of the eye before hand sewing the button on. Instead of buying a very small piece of fabric for the inside trim, I decided to dye a bit of the yellow fabric that I have. The website for Rit Dye More has a color chart where they give you recipes on how to mix the colors. Make sure you read and follow the instructions on the bottles. You always do a test first so you know how long to put the fabric in and if it's the right color in case you need to make adjustments. So I measured approximately how much fabric I needed and then I cut more than that because the fabric tends to shrink during the dye process. Make sure you rinse it well in water and then I hang to dry. With the right sides together, pin the center front and we can sew that shut. So I measured the hood opening, and this kind of measurements, make sure you measure at least twice. And then I decide the thickness that I want and also calculating the seam allowance needed. So with right sides together, I sew the ends together and then we create a circle. I iron the seam open and then I iron the piece in half. So pin the seams together with the center front and then pin all the way around. And then I baste this to the hat. If your main fabric is very thin, it might be a good idea to put a layer of fleece on the inside so that it makes it more gives it more of a body and more stiffness. It does also make it more warm, so if you decide to use this as a winter hat. I just use a regular standard lining fabric. It's a polyester, and you sew it the same way, except for you leave an opening on one of the inside seams. Place the hat inside the lining with the right sides together and pin it, and you're going to sew around the circle opening. Clip the curves of the inner circle. Flip the hat right side out, and we're going to iron the lining flat. Next, we're going to understitch. So understitching is sewing all the seam allowance and all the layers of thickness to the lining. So this stitching will not be shown on the right side. So what this does, it helps keep the fabric flat and it helps keep the lining from kind of popping out. And be careful when you're sewing this part because it's really easy to catch something on the underside that's not supposed to be there. So every so often you look underneath, or for me, I just feel it with my hands if something's in the way. Sorry, the next part of the lining I didn't film very well. So after this part, you flip the lining to the right side out and the bottom has not been sewn. So what you do, you pin the right sides together of the bottom. And then since the lining opening is still open, you pull out the bottom through that hole and then you sew the circle around before pulling it back out of the lining opening. The last step is to sew the lining opening shut. I iron the bottom flat. If my videos and tutorials helped you create something, please tag me. I would love to see your work. Please check out my channel for playlists on cooking, sewing, cosplay, and other tutorials. You can support me by buying me an online coffee, which is a donation of increments by $3, or you can buy anything from my Etsy shop. It's all handmade by me. I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. I hope you have fun with your projects. Bye bye!